Now, Stan is joining us, but he's already informed me through the messenger that he's going to be in listen-only mode. He's got something far more important to do. So he's under pressure to get something finished, and he's working on that, but he wants to listen along and not miss out. He's obviously suffering from FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
So good to have you with us, even in listen-only mode, Stan. We can still feel the spirit. All right. Well, let's get started. So we are here in our series of creating your ideal life, distilling wisdom from books, and working our way through a series of books that I've selected that have made the biggest impact or had the biggest influence on me personally and other people that I've discussed them with, and that I felt would be great to go and review, because it means going back through those books again, but in more detail, and dissecting the wisdom and the important messages that are in these books, because these are pretty much all bestsellers, really, but they're books that are written by people who have got years of experience in their fields, and we can certainly learn a lot from them. And especially if we apply it, it's one thing to read it, it's another thing to put it into practice. So we've been working through a pretty comprehensive list, but at the moment we are now reviewing Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, one of my favorite authors. I've got several of her books now. The subtitle is How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead. Now, in the notes for announcing the meeting, I mentioned that we would do a recap, which is particularly valuable for Jules because she missed last week. And also, I did mention that we'd be covering Debunking the Vulnerability Myths, which is chapter 2. Now, I mentioned that we might go on to chapter 3, which was Understanding and Combating Shame, but I've decided this morning, after going back through chapter 2, that there's enough content there to be discussing, and I'd really like us to have the chance to discuss some of it. So I'm not going to attempt to push on through to chapter 3 because that's a very big chapter. So we'll start with a bit of a recap, and then I'd be happy to hear what any of you have felt from this, or anything that you've been able to put into practice during the last week since reading it, or anything that's had an impact on you. Just to check, I know, Jules, you've said to me you haven't had a chance to, you've ordered the book, you haven't got it yet. Have you listened to it on audio at all?
No, I've actually got it yet, but I just haven't had time to start it.
That's all right. Coralie, how are you going? Have you had a chance to read any of it?
I haven't read it, but I've listened to it.
Okay.
Well, not the thing, but yeah, some of it.
All right, cool. I like to just get a bit of an idea of where people are at, because if everyone's read it and everyone's up to date, then I can gloss through it a little bit more, but I'll perhaps go back through in a little more detail. So let's start with her definition right at the beginning, what it means to dare greatly, which came from one of my favorite speeches, and it's actually a speech that I've quoted in my book, in If Life's Worth Doing, It's Worth Doing Well. And it's the quote from Theodore Roosevelt, made in the Sorbonne in Paris, a speech that was called Citizenship in a Republic, but it's become to be known as the Man in the Arena speech. I'll just read it quickly. I think it's worth reviewing it again because it prompted the title of Brené's book. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Fantastic quote, I think, because it really sums life up for me. The fact that, you know, you have to be in it to win it. You have to get out there, get involved, do stuff. And the people who count the most are the people who are supporting you, not the critics. And it's so easy to criticize, especially in this world of social media today, where everyone is an expert on everything, except the people who actually have the facts at their fingertips. You know, the person sitting in their armchair who's never studied a thing has a more valid opinion than the guy who spent 20 years researching a subject. You know, it's quite funny, isn't it? Sometimes some of the things that you hear people say. So what it means to dare greatly, and I just love that intro to the book. I think it really just sets the scene so perfectly. Any thoughts on that, ladies?
It reminds me of Wayne Dyer I think he wrote a whole book on it, but it was about the doers and the critics.
Yeah.
And you're one or the other, basically, in any situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, it's okay for people to have an opinion. Of course, we built our society on challenging each other's beliefs and opinions because that enables us to explore new possibilities and to grow. It's just we sometimes have to look at the credibility of the validity of the criticism. Is it coming from a place of wisdom or from someone who just wants to pull people down? We have that thing in Australia we call tall poppy syndrome. And you get that in New Zealand as well, where someone gets too big for their boots or is perceived to be going so well. So it's funny because we love to build people up, especially our sporting heroes and our actors and, you know, movie stars. And then as soon as they become famous, everyone seems to take great joy in pulling them back down again, undermining them, telling lies about them, and, you know, exposing their humanity and their weaknesses. It's an interesting mix. All right. So in her little introduction then, following on from quoting that speech, she outlines what the basis of her research. She's been a researcher, spent over a decade, and this is when, hang on, let's just check back. When was this book written? Can anyone tell me? First published in USA in 2012. So, that's 10 years ago. So there you go. So she's done 20 years of research there. Funny, I quoted 20 years before without even knowing that. Isn't that funny? So vulnerability is not knowing victory or defeat. It's understanding the necessity of both. It's engaging. It's being all in. And I love this. Perfect and bulletproof are seductive, but they don't exist in the human experience. No such thing as perfection, even though we like to think that we can strive for perfection. We're all a work in progress. So join me as we explore the answers to these questions. What drives our fear of being vulnerable? How are we protecting ourselves from vulnerability? What price are we paying when we shut down and disengage? And how do we own and engage with vulnerability so we can start transforming the way we live, love, parent, and lead? So it's an interesting couple of topics that are explored in this book because they are kind of taboo subjects. They're the sort of things that people just don't really want to air their dirty washing in public. Is that the right expression? Yeah, they don't want to really expose the struggles that they may be having because it's viewed as weakness. Anyway, we'll come to that. So her introduction then went on to her adventures in the arena and revealing how, well, I highlighted this statement. I feel this vulnerability. She's having a discussion with her therapist, who's a great supporter of her and has really helped her through some tough times. And the therapist is asking her about vulnerability or criticism or judgment. And she said, I feel it when I'm scared that things are too good. So she has this, I don't know if anyone ever experienced that? When everything's going really well, you think, surely it can't, what's the catch? It surely can't be this good. Something's going to stuff up. Anyone ever had that? It's going so well, something's about to go wrong.
Oh, actually, I read something the other day. Oh, I wish I could place where I read it because it was, I'm going to have to find it again. But it said, you know, we all give ourselves, yeah, it's really hard to make, be happy, and you've got to make sure everything's going well before you allow yourself to be happy and all positive. But yeah, you'll be negative and, angry or sad or other, negative emotions without any thought about it. You're just straight there. Something along those lines anyway. I'll have to find it.
Yeah,
it's thought-provoking.
It's that ego part of us, and we'll definitely explore. Another book I really want to get into is The Power of Now. We'll come to that later. But it's that the ego part of us, that is the little voice in our heads that is trying to keep us safe. It's actually got a fundamentally good intention, and that is to protect us, to keep us safe. But that means to protect us from the things that can go wrong. And so it's always warning us, oh, hang on, better be on your guard, because things might be about to go wrong. But in doing so, it goes that one step further, where it's the little voice is saying to us, you shouldn't even be here. You're not good enough to be doing this. Go and hide yourself away and you'll be safe then. As the underlying motive behind it all is our safety, our survival. But it can play some nasty tricks in our minds, and it can certainly limit us. It can make us not do things because we fear the consequences, and which can be a good thing, because it might save our life. We don't go outside the cave because the dinosaur might be out there that's going to eat us. That's where it all kind of started from. But it also means that we don't want to jump up on stage and be a public speaker, or we don't want to risk playing this sport or something in case we fail at it. We don't want to risk embarrassment, humiliation, and so on. So we'll come to all these things. In this introduction, she said that over time, she's describing her life, and she said that over time, she tried everything from being the good girl with my perform perfect please routine to becoming a clove smoking poet, an angry activist, a corporate climber, an out of control party girl. All of my stages were different suits of armor that kept me from becoming too engaged and too vulnerable. So we can put this armor, this suit of armor on, where we don't really want to reveal too much to people we don't trust. And trust is a big issue that we'll come to as we go through. But keeping everyone at a safe distance and always having an exit strategy, she realized was her sort of underlying maxim, even on a subconscious level. But at the same time, she did inherit a huge heart and ready empathy. So she became, after waiting tables and bartending, as a lot of people do in our lives at some point, from going into service roles like that, she ended up being drawn to social work. So she started a career as a social worker, and then found her niche was research, and then just loved that, because possibly that made her less vulnerable to be engaged in the research rather than actually out there dealing with people's issues. She's still dealing with people's issues, but in a slightly more more protected sort of way, because she's the one behind the clipboard asking the questions, and rather than being out there in the trenches so much. Or so it started, and of course now she's become this best-selling author and in demand globally, a speaker who's had a massive impact on the world. And again, it started with social media, her making a speech that was recorded and then went onto YouTube and went viral. And because she's tackled some of the tough topics. And then of course she got invited onto the Oprah Winfrey show, had a discussion with, or was interviewed by Oprah, and that really catapulted her. And she's written several books now. So the previous book, I actually thought this was the first one. I got them in the wrong way around. The other one was called The Gifts of Imperfection, and then she's gone on to Rising
Daring Greatly?
No, Rising Strong. Is it Rising Strong? And yeah, Rising Strong, Dare to Lead, Braving the Wilderness. So there's several there.
Oh yeah, I've read Dare to Lead. Wow.
Cool. And we have somebody else joining us. We have Annie joining us. Hello, Annie. Can you hear us? She's just connecting to audio now. We'll just give her a second so we can welcome her onto the call before we continue on. Taking a little while. I've got these little dots that are moving. Showing, are you seeing that as well? Yeah. So Annie's connected to audio. Are you with us, Annie?
Yes, I am.
Hey, cool. Welcome. Where are you calling in from today?
Calling my room. I'm still awake. As long as I think I was like, okay, I might as well come in.
Well done, Annie. It's great to have you with us. So we've got Julia here, Jules from the Perth Hills. We've got Coralie from New Zealand, and we've got Stan in listen only mode because he's busy doing something else. And Annie, where are you based at the moment?
Gosnells.
Gosnells. So yes, we met Annie only a few weeks ago and had her up to our house, and it's great to see you again.
I'm coming over again.
Cool. All right, so we're just going through we're recapping what we actually covered last week, but nobody was on the call last week that's here today, so we've apart from Stan, sorry. So we're just recapping the introduction to Daring Greatly, which is a book I did recommend to Annie actually just when we met recently. So just covering Brené's development into research and how she found that was an area where she could really make a difference. And she discovered that we are hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives, and without it, there is suffering. I mean, that's obviously why they put people into isolation as a form of punishment or torture even. You know, if you isolate a prisoner, it's soul destroying over a long period because we crave that connection with human beings. So I just mentioned that she's written several other books, and one of them, in The Gifts of Imperfection, she quotes that she defined 10 guideposts for wholehearted living. So wholehearted is this question that the definition that she's come up is a way of engaging with the world from a place of worthiness. So we'll just go through these 10 points quickly. Cultivating authenticity, and that means letting go of what people think. Cultivating self-compassion, letting go of perfectionism. Number 3, cultivating a resilient spirit, letting go of numbing and powerlessness. Number 4, cultivating gratitude and joy, letting go of scarcity and fear of the dark. I don't think that just means the childhood fear of the dark. I think it also means, you know, the dark as a metaphor for stuff we can't control. 5, cultivating intuition and trusting faith, letting go of the need for certainty. Cultivating creativity, letting go of comparison. Cultivating play and rest, letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol, and productivity as self-worth. Those are big ones in our society today, aren't they? Number 8, cultivating calm and stillness, letting go of anxiety as a lifestyle. Number 9, cultivating meaningful work, letting go of self-doubt and supposed to. I could only do one hand because I had my other hand on the book there. So I'm supposed to have that. Number 10, cultivating laughter, song and dance, letting go of being cool and always in control. And so she looked at her own life, and of course then, you know, where have I gone wrong, or what am I doing? And so she came to this conclusion that what she's going to be sharing in the book is wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. 3 powerful words, eh? I am enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I'm also brave and worthy of love and belonging. This definition is based on these fundamental ideas. So love and belonging being irreducible needs of men, women, and children, all of us. And that the absence of love, belonging, and connection always leads to suffering. She divided people into two groups. Those who divide people into two groups and those who don't. That's just something she mentioned in the book as a bit of a humorous side. But no, two groups, those who feel a deep sense of love and belonging and those who struggle for it. And that there's only one variable that separates the groups. Those who feel lovable, who love, and who experience belonging simply believe that they are worthy of love and belonging. Let that sink in for a moment. So if you're struggling to feel love and belonging, it's because underneath it all in some way, you're doubting your worthiness to accept it. So this is what fuels this belief we were just talking about before Annie joined the call, about when everything's going really well, quite often we go, what's the catch? There's something must be about to go wrong. It can't be this good. Life can't be this good, can it? What's about to happen? We're bracing ourselves for the accident, the impact, the bad phone call, or the work issue, or the relationship issue, or whatever it is. So why is that? Well, because underneath it there's that doubt, that self-doubt, and that's again the ego, the little voice popping into our brains going, if you deserve it this good, something's bound to go wrong. Better get ready just in case it does. So she says, number 3, a strong belief in our worthiness doesn't just happen, it's cultivated when we understand the guideposts as choices and daily practices. So the main concern of wholehearted men and women is living a life defined by courage, compassion, and connection. The wholehearted identify vulnerability as the catalyst for courage, compassion, and connection. So vulnerability, the ability to be vulnerable, is at the core, the heart, the center of meaningful human experiences. And she said she loved the freedom, like for instance, she was invited to do this TED talk, which then ended up being recorded and going viral. It's where most of her fame and notoriety came from, is that she loved the freedom of being invited to just talk about whatever she wanted. They didn't give her a structure or a definition of what they expected her to talk about. They just let her go for it. She says, I loved the freedom of that invitation and I hated it. I was back straddling the tension between leaning into the discomfort and finding refuge in my old friend's prediction and control. I decided to go for it. Truthfully, I had no idea what I was getting into. So when she stood up and made that speech, she was, how can I put this nicely? I don't know. Very afraid underneath it all. And probably checking her underwear. So, and yet she did this talk and it went viral and she became this international best-selling author and an in-demand speaker and on the Oprah show. All because she had the courage to be vulnerable, to talk about her research into shame and vulnerability, topics that people generally regard as taboo subjects and feel uncomfortable talking about.
So what do you reckon Oprah's audience number would be?
Oh, that's
the number of her audience.
I don't know. It would be billions, I would think.
Mm.
And it's a great, if you ever get the chance to, well, you can go on YouTube and look it up, the original speech that she made, the TED Talk, Brene, that is. And you can also Google Brene's, Oprah's interview of Brene, which is, I think it was a Soul Sunday Sessions. Really, really good. It really, and even at the end of the interview, Oprah reveals that the first thing Brene said to her was that okay? I love that. So, okay. She started to do this research, started to write this book, and she realized that no matter where she went or with whom she was speaking, the core issues were the same: fear, disengagement, and yearning for more courage. And she did a lot of corporate talks, a lot of work with businesses. And she said that even with executives, most of them talk about their fears of disengagement, lack of feedback, fear of staying relevant amid rapid change, and the need for clarity of purpose. She said, if we want to reignite innovation and passion, we have to rehumanize work. And when shame becomes a management style, engagement dies. When failure is not an option, we can forget about learning, creativity, and innovation. There's an expectation in business, isn't there, of having to achieve really high standards, having to be perfect. But it's how we have to make mistakes in order to learn and grow. And to do that, we have to have the courage to be willing to fail at things, to get things wrong. And that's the same with life. If you want to be loved, you have to risk a love affair failing. You have to risk rejection. If you want to grow in your business or your development, you need to risk setbacks. You need to risk not being perfect all the time. You need to risk criticism. So what we know matters, but who we are matters more. There you go. I've gone on longer than I should have done on that because that's the introduction, but I thought it was important to recap on that. And then chapter 1 was scarcity, which I'm going to move through a little bit faster because I'm conscious of time. Scarcity is, she's looking inside our culture of never enough. So one thing we have in common is that we're sick of feeling afraid. We want to dare greatly. We're tired of the national conversation centering on what should we fear and who should we blame. Isn't that the case on media constantly? When as soon as we get over one thing, whether it's COVID or a war or a flood or we're on to the next disaster and the next thing that can go wrong, the next thing we should be afraid of that might happen. What if it doesn't? What if life goes on or gets better? It's constantly this barrage of negativity, isn't it? And part of that is our own, the public has become more fascinated by everything else going wrong. And I read somewhere that part of that is because in some part of us, we're happy that other people have got it worse than us. It makes us feel better to know, well, look, their house is flooded, their house just burnt down, there's a war over there, there's people sick over there. Well, thank goodness we're all right, So it's crazy, isn't it? That we thrive on that kind of negative stuff, or do we? Or is it just that we've been fed it and led to believe that that's what the news should be? What about all the happy stories? Isn't it nice to get those heartwarming stories that inspire you instead? Like, yeah, there might be a fire or a flood, but what about the person who risked everything to go and save someone, or climbed the tree to get the cat out, or whatever it is? We'd much rather hear that stuff. So she talks about how people are so judgmental these days, and one of the words that's bandied around a lot is narcissism or narcissist. That she talks a bit about narcissism, and that it's become part of the social consciousness that, that person's such a narcissist, they wouldn't even think about themselves or whatever. And she said what most people don't understand is how every level of severity in the actual diagnosis of narcissism is underpinned by shame, which means we don't fix it by cutting people down to size and reminding folks of their inadequacies and smallness. Shame is most likely to be the cause of these behaviors, not the cure. So have you ever been in a meeting at work where the boss shames one of the employees? Well, back in the days when you had jobs before businesses. There's nothing worse, is there, than somebody being publicly chastised? Right? Why not call that person privately into the office and have a word with them? Why not put them down in front of everybody else? It's a culture that is quite damaging. So she talks about vulnerability, the shame-based fear of being ordinary. I see the fear of never feeling extraordinary enough to be noticed, to be lovable, to belong, or to cultivate a sense of purpose. Interesting one, this too. I see the cultural messaging everywhere that says that an ordinary life is a meaningless life. I'm a coach, and part of the thing that I talk to with people about is setting goals and having, becoming the best version of yourself, or this sort of quest for ongoing, never-ending self-improvement. It's certainly something that I believe in. But at the same time, it's okay to be ordinary. We don't all have to be the best at everything, or the leader in something. It's okay to be Average. Wow. It's okay just to be authentic, just to be yourself. That's the key thing. All right. Something can always be learned when we consider these questions. Number one, what are the messages and expectations that define our culture, and how does culture influence our behaviors? So in this world of fast news and, well, the news cycle, you know, and pulling people down and spreading fear and disharmony and all this, how can that not affect you? Two, how are our struggles and behaviors related to protecting ourselves? And three, how are our behaviors, thoughts, and emotions related to vulnerability and the need for a strong sense of worthiness? So she goes on to talk about scarcity being the never enough problem. When she was doing her research and she asked people, here's a phrase, never blank enough. All right. So when you're asking people what comes into their minds, some of the things that were coming out were never good enough, never perfect enough, never powerful enough, never thin enough. Body image is a big issue, isn't it? Never successful enough. Well, where's that coming from? Comparison with other people, or our expectations of ourselves based on what? Maybe our parents expecting us to achieve certain things. The pressure we put on ourselves. Never smart enough. You know, Richard Branson likes to say he wants to be the dumbest person in the room. So, and he's done quite well for himself, you know. Never certain enough, never safe enough, never extraordinary enough. Again, back to this thing of, you know, we have to push ourselves outside our comfort zones if we want to risk. We have to risk failure in order to have success. So we get scarcity because we live it. And there's this lovely quote here. It really sums it up well. She says one of her favorite writers on scarcity is a girl called Lynn Twist, or a lady called Lynn Twist, in her book, The Soul of Money. She refers to scarcity as the great lie. And I'll just read you this little quote. For me and for many of us, our first waking thought of the day is, I didn't get enough sleep. Anyone experience that? The next one is, I don't have enough time. Whether true or not, that thought of not enough occurs to us automatically before we even think to question or examine it. We spend most of the hours and days of our lives hearing, explaining, complaining, or worrying about what we don't have enough of. Before we even sit up in bed, before our feet touch the floor, we're already inadequate, already behind, already losing, already lacking something. And by the time we go to bed at night, our minds are racing with a litany of what we didn't get or didn't get done that day. We go to sleep burdened by those thoughts and wake up to that reverie of lack. This internal condition of scarcity, this mindset of scarcity, lives at the very heart of our jealousies, our greed, our prejudice, and our arguments with life. Powerful, eh? Scarcity is the never enough problem. So we're always comparing our lives, our marriages, our families, our communities to unattainable, media-driven visions of perfections. Or we're holding up our reality against our own fictional account of how great someone else has it.
Grass is always greener.
we don't know what other people are going through. And so you see someone who's driving the flash car and you think, oh, they must be doing all right. What if it's all on finance? What if they live in the posh house, but they actually can't afford it? And underneath it all, they're struggling, or there's so much that in Western Australia, because we've got this mining boom and we've got people who've been living inflated lifestyles, you know, and trying to live up to this sort of expectation of, you know, we've got to have, you know, several houses, investment properties, and we've got to have the posh car and all this. Another one, nostalgia, is also a dangerous form of comparison. Think about how often we compare ourselves in our lives to a memory that nostalgia has so completely edited that it never really existed. Those were the good old days, weren't they? Remember those times? Well, back when I was a lad, it was all wonderful. And was it? No, there were moments when it wasn't so good. So this scarcity is coming from the outside, from culture, but we're living it every day. We're putting it into into our psyche. And there's been, she goes on to talk about some of the global events that have influenced that, things like school shootings, the 9/11 crashes, you know, the bombings, the plagues, the pestilence, all this stuff, you know, biblical stuff. They all share the same formula of shame, comparison, and disengagement. All right, so moving along, one way to think about the three components of scarcity and how they influence culture is to reflect upon the following questions. So we're going to cover shame, comparison, disengagement. Three topics. Shame is fear of ridicule. Is fear of ridicule and belittling used to manage people and or keep people in line? Is self-worth tied to achievement, productivity, or compliance? Are blaming and finger pointing norms? Are put downs and name calling rampant? What about favoritism? Is perfection an issue? And so on. Comparison. Yeah, it's one thing to have competition, to strive to be better, but if we're all comparing ourselves to unattainable goals, that's going to be tough. Disengagement. Are people afraid to risk things or try new things? It's easier to stay quiet than to share stories, experiences, and ideas, perhaps of failing or not being good enough. Right. She says the opposite of enough, of never enough, isn't abundance or more than you could ever imagine. The opposite of scarcity is enough, or what I call wholeheartedness. Wholeheartedness at its very core is vulnerability and worthiness, facing uncertainty, exposure, and emotional risks, and knowing that I am enough. And the greatest casualties of a scarcity culture are our willingness to own our vulnerabilities and our ability to engage with the world from a place of worthiness. One thing we have in common is that we're sick of feeling afraid. We all want to be brave. We want to dare greatly. We're tired of the national conversation centering on what should we fear and who should we blame. Thoughts, anyone?
Lots of profound thoughts there.
Yeah, it's quite sort of confrontational in a way. It makes you think, well, am I doing that? Am I waking up every morning going, oh, I didn't get enough sleep, oh, I haven't got enough time, oh. You know, what a great. So I've made a conscious thing to start the day where I, you know, depends on your own religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs, whatever, but I just go, thank you, universe. I look out the window and I just go, oh, you know, what a great life I've got and how lucky I am. And yeah, so gratitude is a great weapon in the arsenal of combating that kind of scarcity mentality. By just going, I don't have everything, but what I have is enough, and I'm enough, and I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to fail, I'm going to stuff things up. That's okay. That's all you can ask, isn't it? For people to do their best. Just being ordinary is okay. None of us are ordinary, of course. We're all extraordinary, but in our own ways. And it depends on what criteria, what metrics you're using, doesn't it? All right, we'll move on to chapter 2. That's what we're supposed to be covering today, and I haven't left much time for it now, have I? So this is a big one too. Debunking the Vulnerability Myths. She starts with there's the torture chamber that we call uncertainty. There's no equation where taking risks, braving uncertainty, and opening ourselves up to emotional exposure equals weakness. So myth number 1 is that vulnerability is weakness. Well, no, it isn't. Vulnerability is the core of all emotions and feelings. To feel is to be vulnerable. And our rejection of vulnerability often stems from our associating it with the dark emotions like fear, shame, grief, sadness, and disappointment, emotions that we don't want to discuss. Well, we're here to discuss them. So too bad. All right. It's the birthplace. Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It's the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. If we want greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path. She says, I define vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Love is uncertain. Love is risky. It's incredibly risky. Loving someone leaves us emotionally exposed. It's scary, and yes, we're open to being hurt, but can you imagine your life without loving or being loved? To put our art, our writing, our photography, our ideas out into the world with no assurance of acceptance or appreciation, that's also vulnerability. Seth Godin, the marketing guru, who I read loads of his books, I actually love his work. He talks about that tension, the tension between this may work and this might not work. You write a book, people might not like it, people might not read it. You put on a stage performance, people might not turn up. You run a workshop, people might not buy any tickets, no one comes along. Well, that's the risk you take. You've got to be in it to win it, haven't you? So this was interesting. When she did her research, she did this, asked this question of people: vulnerability is blank. Fill in your own word. And there's a list there, quite a long list, but all sorts of things: asking for help, saying no. Pick the ones you want. There's quite a long list. I'm not going to read them all there, but saying I love you first and not knowing if I'm going to be loved back. That's a big one, isn't it? Being really vulnerable, because what if that person doesn't feel the same way about you that you do about them?
What if you say it too early?
Yeah, it might scare them off. We've all done that at some point, surely, in our lives. So we know probably what it feels like to be on both ends of that equation. Getting promoted, not knowing if I'm going to succeed. Getting fired. Leaving a job or being made redundant. So all sorts of things. Admitting that you're afraid of something. Putting the elephant in the room out there. So there's a big list. But she says, do these sound like weaknesses? No, vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. So yeah, we're taking a big emotional risk. Then she asked the question, well, how does vulnerability feel? And again, a long list of responses that she got, but I like this one: not sucking it in anymore. Anyone not really like their photograph being taken? It's all right when you're looking good, and you want to. These days, this world of social media, it's like, the number of people, you get a group photo and they're like, oh, hang on, let me just have a look at that before you post it. Oh no, can you do that one again? I wasn't sucking it in enough, or I had a silly expression on my face or something. It's just reality, isn't it? What else? Sweaty palms, a racing heart, a lump in my throat and a knot in my chest. So that's what it feels like, right? It feels like fear every single time. For some people, panic, anxiety, fear, and hysteria, followed by freedom, pride, and amazement, and then a little more panic. So lots of answers there. But the answer that appeared over and over in all our efforts to better understand vulnerability was naked. Naked as in the sense, oh, excuse me, I'll just plug in my laptop quickly. Goodness, it gave me that message. So as in the sense of like being naked on stage and hoping for applause rather than laughter. I love that one. Being naked when everyone else is fully clothed. It feels like the naked dream. You're in the airport and you're stark naked. So obviously not literally naked, but feeling as if you were naked. And I remember that I went busking years ago and standing on a street corner playing guitar, and someone said, what did that feel like? I said, it felt like you're standing naked on a street corner. So it really does, because you're out there putting your music out, and then you realize no one really cares anyway. They're all walking past, they've all got their own stuff going on in their own life, So a lot of the time, the things that we're afraid of other people's reactions to things or how they're going to judge us, they're not even thinking about you. They don't care. And yet we're there worrying about what they might think. And, oh, what if I offend someone? What if I do this? So she talked about the definition of the word vulnerable: capable of being wounded and open to damage or attack. But weakness was defined as the inability to withstand attack or wounding. She said, just from a linguistic perspective, it's clear that these are very different concepts. In fact, one could argue that weakness often stems from a lack of vulnerability. When we don't acknowledge how and where we're tender, we're more at risk of being hurt. Right. So far from being an effective shield, the illusion of invulnerability undermines the very response that would have supplied genuine protection. Does that make sense? Okay, we love, and this was interesting. She's asked people about if you saw someone walk onto the stage, deliver a speech, whatever, you know, what would you think of them? You would feel that their vulnerability was courage. You'd see them as being brave for standing up there and giving this talk in front of a room full of people. And yet, how many of you struggle to be vulnerable because you think of vulnerability as weakness? We love seeing raw truth and openness in other people, but we're afraid to let them see it in us. We're afraid that our truth isn't enough, that what we have to offer isn't enough. So here's the crux of the struggle. I want to experience your vulnerability, but I don't want to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is courage in you and inadequacy in me. So she asked the question of people, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? It's a good question to ask, isn't it? What's worth doing even if I fail? Would you do a different career? Would you have a different relationship? Would you live in a different place? Would you take any of those bold steps that require a leap of faith? Or is it easier to stay in your comfort zone? So vulnerability is life's great dare. It's life asking, are you all in? Can you value your own vulnerability as much as you value it in others? Answering yes to these questions is not weakness. It's courage beyond measure. It's daring greatly. Thoughts on that, anyone?
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna move on and let you, if you want to jump in and say anything, then just stick your hand up or wave something at me. Myth number 2, I don't do vulnerability. So this is quite an interesting thing. Oh no, I don't do that. I don't make myself, don't let myself be vulnerable. Well, she said, unfortunately, there is no get out of vulnerability free card, because we can't opt out of the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure that's woven through our daily experiences. Life is vulnerable. Just by being here, by being alive, by being a human being, you are vulnerable. Quick 3 questions here. What do I do when I feel emotionally exposed? 2, how do I behave when I'm feeling very uncomfortable and uncertain? 3, how willing am I to take emotional risks? And she said, before I started doing this work, my honest answers would have been scared, angry, judgmental, controlling, very unwilling at work if criticism, judgment, blame, or shame was possible. So defensive, I suppose, is, if you want to sum it up in one word. You retreat, don't you? You don't want to be vulnerable. You don't want to be outside your comfort zone. And so the irony is that regardless of our willingness to do vulnerability, it does us. It isn't a choice. It's just the only choice we have is how we're going to behave when we're confronted with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. How are we going to behave? So we can't control what happens to us. We can only control how we react or how we respond to what happens to us, how we deal with it, how we move on, how we fight back. Myth number 3, is that vulnerability is letting it all hang out. So that doesn't mean that we do the opposite. You know, the pendulum doesn't swing completely the other way. We don't just meet someone and go, "Hi, I'm Tony, and this is my greatest weakness, and I'm absolutely shit at this, and I'm not good enough at that." You don't start off by sharing all that stuff, do you? Because you ever met someone like that in a dinner party or something? You're like, "What?" Too much information. So vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. Being vulnerable and open is mutual and an integral part of the trust building process. So maybe a little bit different if you go to a professional like a coach or a therapist or a psychologist, because you're going there for that purpose, but not in a social situation. So there's parameters, you put sort of boundaries around things. Sharing appropriately with boundaries means sharing with people with whom we've developed relationships that can bear the weight of our story. The result of this mutually respectful vulnerability is increased connection, trust, and engagement. Three powerful components here. Trust, the need for trust. Well, it's a chicken and egg situation. We need to feel trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to trust. And that's that thing about telling someone you love them, isn't it? You know, you need to risk that they might not love you back. If you want to trust someone, you risk the fact that they might be betrayed. So she goes on to talk about betrayal, and this great story from her child in class, where the teacher, this girl, her daughter, had shared some secrets with some of her friends, and then the next thing was those secrets were being spread around the school, and people were laughing at her, and so on. She felt really betrayed, and so she's come home to tell her mum this is what happened, really upset, crying, and all this. She's never going to tell anyone anything ever again. Anyone relate to that? So anyway, the teacher, she's going, Brene's going, how do I deal with this? What do I do to not shut her down? Because you don't want her to feel that she can't tell anyone anything. Well, the teacher came up with this great idea called the marble jar. She kept a bag of colored marbles next to the jar in the classroom. Whenever the class was collectively making good choices, she would throw some marbles into the jar. But whenever they were acting up or breaking rules or not listening, she would take marbles out of the jar. And when the marbles made it to the top of the jar, the students would be rewarded with a celebration party. Great incentive, hey, for kids. So the marble jar was her perfect answer. When people are mean or disrespectful, share your secrets, marbles come out. But when people are good or kind or do something nice, marbles go in. So she used this marble jar example, and then they started thinking about, well, what would constitute a good thing from a friend that would enable you to put a marble in the jar? Things like them keeping your secrets, them telling you their secrets, remembering important things like your birthday, making sure you're included in fun things, noticing if you're sad and asking why, and those kinds of things, noticing if you're not well and offering whatever support you can. All those little things build trust over time and put marbles in the jar. So she said, trust is built one marble at a time. Lovely analogy, isn't it? Or metaphor. Is it analogy or metaphor? I know it's probably both. But trust is built in very small moments, which this author, John Gottman, who wrote the book called The Science of Trust, Emotional Attunement for Couples, talks about the relationships. When you have your relationship with your partner, trust is built in very small moments, which he calls sliding door moments, where you could, in any interaction, there's a possibility of connecting with your partner or turning away from your partner. And you think about that one, there's so many times in the week with a relationship where you could pay attention and stop what you're doing and give your full attention to your partner and listen to them and encourage them or support them or do something kind or considerate. Or you could ignore them, say, oh, shush a minute, I'm watching the TV, or I've got to just deal with this phone call, or anything else that's more important than actually being present for your partner. Same with children, with your kids. So parenting, relationships, Friends, are you there? So all these little moments where you could do this as a sliding door moment. You could do this, you could do that. But if you do the one that builds trust over time is where you put aside the thing that's not so important, put down your phone, turn down the volume on the TV, or pause, hit the pause button, and listen, or be attentive, be present. And she goes on to talk about, when you talk about betrayal, we tend to think of betrayal as this one-off big act, like, you know, sleeping with somebody else or doing something horrible. But she says one of the worst things happens long before the other ones, and that's usually the betrayal of disengagement, when we stop being willing to devote time and effort to the relationship. The little things, right? Failing to defend us to someone else who's gossiping about us. Stop paying attention, stop caring, stop investing and fighting for the relationship. Trust begins to slip away and hurt starts seeping in. So with marriages, and I speak now as someone who's had 2 divorces, so I have some authority on this subject. It's a slow process. It doesn't just happen usually with one incident. It's usually a slipping away of, you don't feel the same way about that person anymore, or they don't feel the same way about you. How does that happen? Where does it go from that to suddenly that person is acting, as I put it with my second wife, as if she'd been invaded, her body had been invaded by some alien creature, and she was no longer the person I knew and met, that I loved when I first met her. It happens over time, and we're so busy that we don't notice the little changes. Disengagement triggers shame and our greatest fears, the fears of being abandoned, unworthy, and unlovable. Powerful chapter, this one. Trust isn't a grand gesture, it's a growing marble collection. It's a good one to remember for this week, isn't it? The marble collection, the marble jar. And here's myth number 4, that we can go it alone. We can't make this journey through life alone. We need support. We need friends. We need people to get on Zoom calls with and discuss these things. we need each other if we're going to build things, be successful with things, create things. And yet we sometimes attach judgment to receiving help. But when we do that, she says, we knowingly or unknowingly attach judgment to giving help. So you might think that if we have to give help to someone, they're weak. That's because we're thinking that if we accept help, we must be weak. So we think we've got to do it all on our own. No, it's actually sometimes takes courage to ask for help. And she says, vulnerability begets vulnerability. Courage is contagious. That's a powerful thought, isn't it? We've lost Coralie. I don't know what's happened there. I don't feel rejected. I'm not going to feel all vulnerable and hurt. I think that maybe she had something else she had to go to deal with, or that her internet disconnected for some reason. It's all okay. And we are slightly over time, so I'm finishing up fairly soon. It's and she's back. There you go. See, I was right. She does love us. Coralie, you do love us after all.
Oh, sorry, my computer just went blue screen. We're fixing a problem or something. It was weird.
That's all right. It's just quite funny, actually, the timing of that, because just we're talking about all that stuff. I didn't take it personally. I took it as is it probably something beyond your control. All right. Well, and she came to the point where she was having a discussion with her husband, Steve, and she was watching her daughter do some dances where she's flinging her arms around, slapping her knees, and doing tumbles. She looked at her husband and she said, "Isn't it funny? I just love her that much more for being so vulnerable and uninhibited and goofy. I could never do that. Can you imagine knowing that you're loved like that?" And Steve looked at me and said, "I love you exactly like that." Honestly, as someone who rarely risked vulnerability and always steered clear of silly or goofy, it never dawned on me that adults could love each other like that I could be loved for my vulnerabilities, not despite them. So we come back to authenticity, don't we? When we're actually our authentic selves, that's the person that you fall in love with, not, you know, when you see them warts and all, as the old saying said, when that's the reality. That's the person that you want to love, is that you love them with their vulnerabilities, with their frailties, not you know, you're not just selecting the bits that you like. And that's often where marriages can fail, relationships can fail, is that old thing of, they've got potential, I'm going to fix them. Anyone ever heard that? You can't really fix people. They need to fix themselves, if there is such a thing as needing to be fixed. It's, you know, they might have a character foible, or they've made some mistakes, but we're all a work in progress. All right. So going back to what spurned the title of Daring Greatly, the Roosevelt speech, the Man in the Arena speech, I also learned that the people who love me, the people I really depend on, were never the critics who were pointing at me while I stumbled. They weren't in the bleachers at all. They were with me in the arena, fighting for me and with me. Nothing has transformed my life more than realizing that it's a waste of time to evaluate my worthiness by weighing the reaction of the people in the stands. If you did that, you would never risk anything, would you? You know, a comedian going on stage has to go, well, I'm giving it my best shot, and they may laugh and they may not laugh. The singer has to perform and hope that they don't get the negative review the next day, but if they do, well, that's life. You know, some people love you, some people hate you. You can't control what other people think or how they're going to react. What matters is the encouragement, support of those people who want you to do the best you can. Sometimes our first and greatest dare is asking for support. Dun, dun, dun. Chapter 2. What are your thoughts on that, people? Powerful chapter. Jules, anything you'd like to share? Any insights?
No, I think
anecdotes?
no. I'm saying, yeah, I think it's going to take some reading and rereading to yeah, like I said, very, very profound thoughts from our Brene. She goes over some of that in her other books.
Yeah,
you know, there's a bit of overlap and repetition, but yeah, it's all very.
Yeah, there's slight variations in her different books, but they're, you know, the underlying theme is that she's researched 20 years on shame and you know, feeling enough, feeling worthy, the scarcity. So shame and vulnerability, her main topic. So of course there's going to be a lot of overlaps in her books because they are sort of the underlying themes. And the one on leadership, for instance, you know, talks a lot more about, if you want to lead people, you have to risk failing. You have to dare greatly in order to take on that mantle of leadership. And of course, in relationships, if you want to have a great marriage, you have to risk not having a great marriage, you know, or even just a boyfriend, girlfriend. So you've got to also, it starts with you. You can't fix the other person. It's what's going on inside you, and are you being authentic, being your best version of yourself? And are you being judgmental of people, or are you taking them as they are and maybe not being attached to things or attached to your points of view, perhaps? Coralie, any thoughts from you on this? How did it impact on you at all, this chapter?
It's a big deal, isn't it? Vulnerability. And it's so true that sort of, you know, it's a strength in other people, but a weakness in me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite a lot to, you can just believe it, but actually taking that in and using it is the challenge.
That's a great share. Thanks, Coralie. I think for me, it's that I know it's a bit of a cliche, but that old statement of the, you know, the biggest growth happens outside your comfort zone. You need to be willing to push through and risk failing, risk being vulnerable, and therefore to do that you have to step outside what's comfortable and secure and familiar, and go, okay, I'm gonna push myself here. I'm gonna try and do something that I can't do at the moment, or I'm gonna learn a new skill, or I'm gonna be brave and do something. And then afterwards you realize, in a lot of cases, the more you do that, the easier it becomes to start with. And secondly, that most of what you feared was imaginary. You know, that you probably thought it was harder than it was going to be, or you weren't good enough, but in actual fact you were. So the more you trust yourself, you build that, like, again, one marble at a time. The more you put that trust in yourself, the more you come to the realization that no matter what happens, I'll deal with it. I'll grow stronger. And I've survived other things, I'll survive this. We'll come out the other end. You know, unless it's something like stepping off a mountainside or something like that, we might not survive it. But we can put ourselves in these situations, and this is perhaps the adrenaline rush, these things that we do, extreme sports and things like that, is to push our boundaries, to see, well, if I can do that, what else could I do? I know I did a parachute jump, and I had that feeling, I've got a pilot's license. I went, what are you doing, you crazy idiot? You're stepping outside a perfectly serviceable aircraft, hanging off the wing strut and letting go of this plane, going, oh my God. And after doing it, I was like, oh, wow, I can do anything. Because I was, you know, slightly afraid of doing that. Annie, have you got any thoughts, impact on this, impact on you?
Actually, I did the bravest thing when you were talking about vulnerability. So, you know, I'm seeing someone at the moment, and I dropped my vulnerability, and you know the situation, and he's willing to stick by it.
Good for you.
And yeah, I you know, this is the first person that's willing to support me along my journey. And, you know, it was hard for me to even drop that vulnerability, but he was even saying, you communicating that is so strong, and the way you communicate it, I can connect with you a lot more, because the way you say it is inspiring. And, you know, just by that, you know, I've shared my story to him, and he was willing to support me on that, and he understood why the other relationships did work out, because I told him, but he's willing to stick it out with me. So I was just like, this is new. But that's the thing, you're taking a risk, dropping your vulnerability. And I told him this is my vulnerable side, and then I told him my needs, and then he's willing to do it. So it's nice, and it's like you said, sometimes it's like too good to be true, but I don't want to project that out. You know, I just need to take each day and enjoy the moment and go with it, and go with the flow, because you never know what's going to happen. Like, you know, if you end up getting married or having a relationship, you never know until, like, oh, I don't love you anymore, or, you know, that person died. You still need to continue on with your life. Of course, you go through the grieving and everything, but you still have to keep going on, because the partner doesn't define you. They're just there to support you and help you grow, and that's what it's all about. But yes, in order for you to grow, you really have to drop your vulnerability and have that deep intimacy connection, and accept who you are as well at the same time. It's amazing, actually, to be honest. And this conversation that we're having, it's like giving me a lot of like reflection within myself. And what you said about, you know, you shouldn't be dating them potential or fixing them. And it's so true. Like before, I was like, previous partners, like I was thinking like, oh, you know, I can fix them, and that. I was like, nah, not anymore. This is the part where I'm like, I'm not fixing them, because it drains me out. I need someone that I can just support, and we can just grow.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's the ideal, isn't it? Where you're not looking to, you know, the Jerry Maguire quote, the movie Jerry Maguire, and that famous quote of, you know, she completes me. We're not looking for someone to complete us. It's our responsibility to complete us. We're just there for somebody who can enhance our relationship, enhance us, but not fix us. That's our job. Fix ourselves. So well done. That's a big step, big breakthrough. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, as I said at the beginning, and I knew we would be recapping quite a bit today, I felt that was a big enough chapter to get to that point in the book, and because the next one is understanding and combating shame, which is, you think vulnerability was a tough topic.
Shame.
Shame's going to be an interesting one as well. So I love this because it is all about connection, and it starts with us being willing to risk being vulnerable, and working on ourselves. And that's what this is all about. These self-development books are all helping us, because none of us are perfect. We're all on a journey. We all have something, and that's why they say be kind to people you meet, because everyone's dealing with something. You never know what it is that they're going through, what their experience has been, and what they're battling internally. So comparison is a dangerous thing, because we're looking to compare ourselves with others. We don't actually know what they're going through, what they've been through to get to where they are today. So if somebody you see as successful, and you think, oh, it's easy for them, they've got it all, they've got this, they've got that. Yeah, but no one's an overnight success. People have to work at it. We've all got to put that marble in the jar each time ourselves, and build them up over time. All right, that's enough. I've taken enough of your time today. Thank you so much for being here, for your input. I hope you all got something valuable out of that. Think about what we've covered today, and put it into practice this week. And hopefully we'll see you all again same time next week, and we'll do the next chapter.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Tony.
Tony.
Bye.
Nice to meet you all.
You too. See ya.
Now I'm trying to end the meeting, and it's not letting me get to it. Why not?